friends, this is the program Empire of Lies, where we discuss manipulation and disinformation in Russian media. Europe doesn't exist, how Solovyov constructs a worldview without Europe and without Ukraine. This excerpt from the latest episode of Vladimir Solovyov's show demonstrates how Russian propaganda simultaneously accomplishes several goals: discrediting Ukraine, humiliating Europe, justifying the continuation of the war, and fueling anti-Western and sometimes xenophobic sentiments within Russia. For European readers, it's important to recognize not only the aggressive language, but also the logical construct within which it's embedded. 1. There is no Europe for America. The reduction of Europe as a subject. Solovyov begins with a thesis that runs through his entire monologue. There is no Europe for America. America doesn't see right through them. He then ridicules the attempts of European leaders, Kaja Kallas, Macron, Starmer, to influence the negotiations and propose alternative plans. European initiatives on security, troop presence, and negotiations are described as insignificant, who are you, of no weight for the US, out of touch with reality, since they supposedly contradict the real American plan. The purpose of this ploy is to create the impression in the Russian audience that the European Union is not a subject. Decisions are made only by Washington and Moscow. Europe is a superfluous and obstructive player, bustling under a client. This is a direct challenge for Europe. The legal and political architecture of post-war Europe was built on the premise that European states determine their own security. In Solovyov's rhetoric, this principle is erased. Natürlich herrscht Panik. Ich möchte nur ein paar sehr wichtige Punkte wiederholen. Erstens, es gibt kein Europa für Amerika. Amerika durchschaut sie nicht. Kaja Kallas' Versuch, ein separates Treffen mit Rubio abzuhalten, ist ein Versuch, einen Alternativplan durchzusetzen. Eine Koalition der Willigen. Wir werden französische und britische Truppen in der Türkei stationieren. Wer sind sie? Der angeblich amerikanische Plan, der durchgesickert ist, enthält weder NATO-Truppen noch etwas, was dem auch nur annähernd nahe kommt. Keine Koalition der Willigen oder Unwilligen. Das ist alles Unsinn. Und dann Macron. In wessen Namen spricht er? Seit wann ist der Franzose für Erdogans Truppen zuständig? Erdogan, der Macron verachtet und ihm das regelmäßig zeigt. Nun, wer ist er überhaupt, dass er solche Worte ausspricht? Okay, Starmer ist ein Niemand und die Briten wischen sich nur die Füße ab. 2. Ukraine as a corrupt colony, normalizing blackmail. The key theme of the passage is the Ukrainian elite as absolute corrupt officials, controlled by the US through criminal cases and compromising material. Solovyev relishes in detail the presidential office's dependence on US security agencies, the role of NABU as an instrument of external control, the story of Mindich and Umarov, the idea that opening 3 more cases is enough to put Kyiv in its place. At the same time, openly dehumanizing and racist language is used against Ukrainians. This is important not only as a form of hate speech, but also as a political tool. The audience is convinced that such people cannot and should not be negotiated with as equals. Another important construct is added. Ukraine allegedly already received a gesture of goodwill, the withdrawal of Russian troops from Kyiv, but deceived Russia. Hence the logic. There will be no more goodwill gestures, and the focus is on finishing it through a violent change of power, punishment of the Nazi elite, and so on. This is a dangerous framework, effectively justifying the continuation of the war until Ukraine's political collapse. 3. European and American elites as cynical players. Another important line is the darstelling of the West as a cynical force that doesn't care about Ukrainians. The United States never intended to die for Ukraine. European and American politicians are allegedly profiting from the war. Hawks in Washington and London are described as financially motivated. Caroline Leavitt's speech, in which she hints that some critics of the peace plan may benefit from continuing the war, is used as convenient confirmation of an old propaganda thesis. Western elites are cynical, and Ukraine is expendable to them. In this narrative, the war is transformed into a pattern. The US wants to jump off the Ukrainian issue and focus on Venezuela. They need to resolve the issue with Russia. The Ukrainians were rolled out a plan not for agreement, but for pressure. Europe is only hindering the US's exit from the war. 4. Anti-Ukrainian and anti-Western rhetoric bordering on incitement. The language Solovyov and his guests use toward Ukrainians deserves special attention. The constant use of offensive nicknames, comparisons of Ukrainians to savages, calls to raise their power with bayonets. Such rhetoric is not simply offensive, it systematically destroys the idea of the enemy as people with dignity, rights, and political agency. This is no longer a dispute over borders or security, it is dehumanization. Think, analyze, draw conclusions, and don't be fooled. This was the program Empire of Lies.